He thought he had finally found peace. After years of serving his country with honor, he came home to a quiet neighborhood where he believed he could rest, rebuild, and simply live. But peace doesn't always wait for heroes. For one man, the uniform he wore to protect others became the very reason he was targeted in his own community. It started with a demand that seemed almost absurd, an order shouted not by law enforcement, but by a neighbor with power, pride, and prejudice. She didn't see a veteran who risked his life overseas. She saw only what she wanted to see, and she decided he didn't belong. But what began as a simple act of harassment soon spiraled into something far more sinister. He wasn't just being told to strip away his camouflage. He was being stripped of his dignity, his service, and his right to exist peacefully in the place he called home. What this neighbor never realized was that some battles don't end on foreign soil. Sometimes the fight follows you back, and this time she was about to face the strength of a man and a unit she never could have imagined. So the question is, how far would you go when home becomes hostile? It was supposed to be a new chapter. After years of service, Marcus, a decorated Army veteran, had finally come home. He traded the roar of helicopters and desert winds for the quiet hum of suburban streets. His mornings were filled with the simple things he once dreamed of: brewing coffee, tending to a small garden, and waving to neighbors on his evening walks. For the first time in a long time, life felt steady. Marcus wore his camouflage jacket proudly, not to boast, but as a silent reminder of where he had been and what he had survived. It was part of him, stitched with memories of brothers and sisters in arms and the heavy sacrifices they made. To him, the jacket wasn't just clothing. It was respect. It was history. But in a world that should have welcomed him back with open arms, not everyone saw it that way. Behind the manicured lawns and pristine fences of his neighborhood lurked something uglier, something unspoken but sharp as glass. And it would only take one voice, one entitled demand, to remind Marcus that the fight for dignity wasn't over. The battlefield had changed, but the enemy looked unsettlingly familiar. Marcus had lived in that neighborhood for only a few months when the first signs of trouble appeared. At first it was small, sideways glances when he walked down the street in his camouflage jacket, whispers that cut off the moment he got close. He tried to ignore it. He had faced far worse overseas, but in the back of his mind there was a question he couldn't shake. Why did home feel less welcoming than a war zone? The answer revealed itself one afternoon. Marcus was trimming his hedges when a woman stormed up the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, the letters HOA printed at the top. She didn't greet him. She didn't smile. Instead, she pointed directly at his jacket hanging on a porch chair. Her voice was sharp, each word laced with authority she had given herself. "That doesn't belong here," she said. Marcus blinked, unsure if he'd heard her right. The jacket? The same one that had shielded him through sandstorms, firefights, and long nights under foreign skies? Before he could respond, she doubled down. Neighborhood rules. No military gear outside. It's disruptive. Disruptive. The word stung more than any insult. To her, his service, his sacrifice was an eyesore, a stain on the carefully painted picture of her perfect community. He tried to reason with her, but she wasn't listening. Instead, she scribbled notes on her clipboard, snapped a photo, and left with a smirk. That was only the beginning. Days later, Marcus found letters taped to his door. "Remove the jacket. You're lowering property values. This isn't a military base." Each message was more aggressive than the last, typed in bold print with no signature, but everyone knew where they came from. The pressure didn't stop there. Neighbors he once waved to now crossed the street to avoid him. Conversations hushed when he walked past. The jacket, once a quiet tribute to his fallen brothers, had become a symbol of division, at least in their eyes. Still, Marcus refused to back down. He wore it more often, not less. He reminded himself that dignity isn't surrendered, it's defended. But the more he stood his ground, the harder the HOA leader, Karen, pushed back. One evening, as he returned from a jog, he noticed something strange. His porch chair was empty. The jacket was gone. Panic surged through him as he scanned the yard. Then he saw it. Crumpled near the trash bins, mud smeared across the fabric. That night, rage kept him awake. He had fought for freedom abroad, only to have his own neighbor strip it away at home. Yet deep down, he knew this wasn't just about fabric. It was about erasure, about someone deciding what parts of him were acceptable and what parts weren't. The next morning, Karen was waiting, clipboard in hand. "This is your final warning," she sneered. "Take it off, or the board will handle it." Marcus didn't answer. He looked her in the eye, calm but unyielding, and walked inside. That silence, that refusal to submit, rattled her more than any argument. But it also escalated the war. Within days, official letters arrived, threats of fines, threats of legal action. She even tried to rally other neighbors against him, spreading lies that he was unstable and aggressive. Her whispers turned to poison, and soon Marcus felt like the enemy in the very place he'd sworn to protect. But what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Marcus was never truly alone. His brothers in arms, his unit, were just a call away. Men and women who knew exactly what that jacket meant. Veterans who understood that when one of their own is attacked, silence is not an option. And so, as Karen tightened her grip, Marcus quietly prepared his response. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply made a call. A short message that traveled faster than gossip ever could. The next time Karen tried to humiliate him, she wouldn't just be facing one man on a porch. She would be facing the very thing she underestimated, the bond of soldiers, the weight of service, and the unshakable power of solidarity. But the question lingered. How far would she push before realizing she had stepped into a fight she could never win? The morning of the showdown began like any other, but Marcus could feel it in the air, thick, heavy, and unshakable. Karen wasn't done, not yet. She had made him a target. And today, she was ready to make an example. It started with voices. Not just hers this time, but a small crowd gathering near his front yard. Clipboard in hand, she barked accusations loud enough for the whole block to hear. "This man refuses to follow the rules. He's a danger to this community. Look at him, parading around like a soldier in a war zone. This is a neighborhood, not a battlefield." Every word pierced Marcus like shrapnel. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably, some nodding, others staring at the ground, unwilling to intervene. For Marcus, it wasn't just humiliation, it was betrayal. The people he once waved to, the people he thought were his community, were now silent witnesses to his public shaming. Karen pointed at his jacket hanging proudly over the porch railing, her voice rising to a shriek. "Take it down, or we'll make sure you regret it." And then she did something unthinkable. She stormed up his porch steps, snatched the jacket, and held it up like a trophy. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She didn't see it as fabric stitched with sacrifice. She saw it as trash to be discarded. She balled it up in her hands, ready to toss it onto the lawn like it was nothing. In that moment, Marcus felt his chest tighten. Memories flooding back. Brothers who never came home, the flag-draped coffins, the nights he wore that jacket to remind himself he had survived. And here she was, tearing at the last thread of respect he carried. Something inside him broke, but not with rage, not with violence. Instead, he stepped forward with a quiet strength that silenced the murmurs. His voice shook, but his words were steady. "That jacket isn't just mine. It belongs to every man and woman who gave everything for this country. You want to throw it away? Then you're throwing away them too." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. Even Karen froze, her fingers tightening around the fabric, her face twisting between defiance and doubt. But before she could respond, the sound came. Footsteps. Dozens of them, steady and synchronized. From the corner of the street they appeared. Men and women in plain clothes, but their presence unmistakable. Marcus's unit, his brothers and sisters, Veterans who had fought beside him, who had carried the same scars, who understood exactly what was at stake. They didn't come with weapons. They didn't come with threats. They came with silence, standing shoulder to shoulder in his yard, their eyes fixed on Karen. The crowd fell silent. Karen's bravado cracked, her voice faltering as she realized what she was facing. Not a lone man, but the weight of an entire unit, a family forged in battle and bound by loyalty. Marcus stepped closer, his gaze locked on her trembling hands, still clutching the jacket. "You wanted to erase me," he said softly. "But you forgot. Soldiers don't stand alone." Karen's face flushed red, her words sputtering into nothing. For the first time, the power she had clung to slipped from her grasp. In that moment, the balance shifted. The humiliation she had tried to inflict on Marcus now hung over her, heavy and undeniable. And as she dropped the jacket, letting it fall into Marcus's arms, the message was clear. The battle she thought she could win had just turned into a war she couldn't fight. But the question lingered. What would happen next? Would she back down quietly, or would her hatred drive her to strike again, even harder? Karen's voice never returned to the same pitch that day. As the veteran stood in silence, as Marcus cradled the jacket she had tried to strip away, something inside her faltered. She turned, muttered excuses under her breath, and retreated down the sidewalk, her clipboard pressed against her chest as if it could shield her from the weight of her own actions. The crowd dispersed slowly, some embarrassed, some thoughtful, and others unable to meet Marcus's eyes. For Marcus, victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like survival. He hadn't asked for this confrontation. He hadn't wanted to be the center of a spectacle. All he wanted was to live in peace, to wear a simple reminder of who he was and what he had endured. Yet even here, in the quiet suburbs, he had been forced to defend his dignity in front of strangers who saw him as a problem instead of a neighbor. That night, as he sat on his porch with his unit beside him, Marcus realized something deeper. The fight wasn't really about a jacket. It wasn't even about Karen. It was about the larger truth, that for too many black men in America, home is not always a place of rest. It's a place where dignity can be challenged, where worth is questioned, and where even service and sacrifice are not enough to shield against prejudice. Karen would go on to face consequences. The HOA's threats lost power when Marcus and his fellow veterans brought the incident to light. Complaints were filed, leadership was questioned, and neighbors who had once stayed silent were now forced to confront the ugliness in their own community. Some apologized, others stayed distant, but no one could deny what had happened on that lawn. But Marcus's takeaway was not in her downfall. It was in the reminder that silence is complicity, that racism thrives not only in hateful voices, but also in the quiet ones that choose not to speak. When he looked at his jacket now, he saw more than memories of war. He saw a different kind of battle, one that doesn't happen overseas but right here, every day. A battle for respect, for humanity, for the simple right to exist without being reduced to stereotypes or stripped of identity, and he knew he was not alone. His story mirrored countless others, stories that rarely make headlines, stories that echo in schools, workplaces, and neighborhoods across the country. Stories of people who have to justify their presence, defend their dignity, and fight for the space they already earned. So what do we take from this? That racism doesn't always wear a hood or wave a flag. Sometimes it wears a name tag, a badge, or in this case, a clipboard. It hides behind rules, behind standards, behind the illusion of order, and unless we recognize it, unless we call it what it is, it continues to poison communities that pretend to be united. Marcus kept his jacket. He wore it when he wanted, unapologetically. And every time he did, it wasn't just for him. It was for every voice silenced, every sacrifice overlooked, every neighbor who ever felt unwelcome in their own home. The question is not whether Karen learned her lesson. The real question is whether we will, because Marcus's story isn't isolated. It's one page in a book that keeps being written, again and again, in different towns with different faces, but the same message. How many more times will this story repeat before we decide enough is enough? Because peace isn't just the absence of war, it's the presence of justice. And until that justice exists in every neighborhood for every person, the battle isn't over.